Al-Mawrid.
Right. Assalamu alaikum to all our attendees for today's session. I'm your host and class assistant and coordinator Marathi Ali from Al-Mawrid, UK. Have our great presence with us of Dr. Khalid Zaheer. It is our regular session, and in this session, we will be discussing Holy Quran, some verses, and some advanced learning. And today we are starting a new topic of why believe in God or why believe in Allah. Um, the Word document I have shared already, but I can send you in our WhatsApp group as well for this. And the third session, which is a special talk today on the horrible incident happened in Christchurch 2 weeks ago. So Dr. Sir will put a light on this incident as well, especially in the point of view how we should respond uh, as a collective Muslim effort uh, in response of this horrible incident happened in Christchurch. So, and after that we will have a half an hour question answer. So we will try to take question answer from everyone, and it is advisable that you can note down your questions, or there is a window on this platform on a GoToWebinar portal. You can also uh, type a question as well. And when there is a question answer segment, we can ask that as well. During the whole session, your mics will be on mute mode, and when we will start the question answer after half an hour, then your mics will be unmuted and you will be on self mute mode. So you will be controlling your own mic. So we will request Dr. Khalid Zaheer to start the session, and the verse number, the chapter from the Quran, Surah to Tawbah, chapter number 9, and today we will discuss verse 5, 6, and 14, and then accordingly the other segment will be following. Thank you. Please over to Dr. Khalid Zaheer.
Thank you, Brother Maratib. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As Brother Maratib has mentioned, I will I will take only a half an hour. I'll try to make it even less, so that according to my watch, I finish at I think it's probably 9:30 your time. It's 2:30 our time. The first segment is always on understanding a certain passage of the Quran. The important passage of the Quran that we are going to now discuss it's comprised of three verses of Surah At-Tawbah, the ninth surah of the Quran, the surah that talks about the Almighty's punishment that was inflicted on the people who rejected the message of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. It's an important understanding which I will talk about when I'll talk about the question of the aftermath of what happened in New Zealand. The Almighty describes in the Quran very clearly that He has a law according to which if there is a nation which is visited by God's messenger Rasul, and the message is delivered by the messenger in an unmistakably clear manner, then if the nation refuses to accept it and goes on to oppose the messenger of God, to cause harm to him and to his companions, and force him to leave the place of his origin where he lived, then it is God's principle, his rule, that he causes his punishment to fall upon such nation. The last prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him, was a messenger of God as well, Rasulullah. Therefore, his nation also had to meet with the same punishment. And this punishment has been described in the Quran in Surah At-Tawbah. The punishment that was inflicted upon the nation that rejected the last messenger was conducted through the military might, the swords of the companions of the messenger, because their number was large. In the case of many of the earlier messengers, because their number was small, God Almighty employed natural calamities to cause his punishment to be inflicted. Now, this is what has been described in Surah Tawbah. In verse 5, the Almighty says, فَإِذَنْ سَلَخَ الْأَشْهُرُ الْحُرُمُ. Then, when the sacred months lapse, the months which have been declared sacred in order for pilgrims to visit the house of God. These sacred months are Zulqad, Zulhajj, Muharram, and another one, Rajab. The Almighty says, when these sacred months lapse, فَقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ, then you kill the polytheists, حَيْثُ وَجَدْتُمُوهُمْ, wherever you find them. This was the statement that asked believers to inflict God's punishment on those people who had understood God's message. They knew that it was from God. Their own trusted individual delivered the message to them, and yet they went ahead to oppose him and to reject the message. However, because it was possible, excuse me, because it was possible that the manner the message was delivered, despite the fact that it was done in an excellent way, in an ideal way, there were still people who were unaware. The 6th verse therefore says, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, if there are some people, somebody from amongst these polytheists, istajaraka, who seeks your protection, فَأَجِرْهُ, so grant him protection. Hatta yasma kalam Allah, until such time that he hears God's message. Thumma ablighu mamana, and then leave him to a place of security. Why? Zalika bi annahum, this we are telling you so that, because of the fact that these people, qawmul la ya'lamun, they don't know. In other words, it were only those people who knew what the Almighty's message was, and yet they were bent upon denying and rejecting it, that the Almighty decided that His punishment is going to be inflicted on them. If there was anybody who didn't know it from before, he was allowed the facility to learn the message of God first, and then was left to a place of security for him to consider as to whether he's going to accept the message or not. Verse 14 goes on to say what we keep saying over and over again, that the Almighty had used this method in order for His punishment to be inflicted. So that the Quran says in verse 14 of Surah Tawbah, قَاتِلُوهُمْ, fight them, O believers. يُعَذِّبْهُمُ اللَّهُ بِأَيْدِيكُمْ, God is going to inflict His punishment upon them, بِأَيْدِيكُمْ, through your hands. In other words, what is happening in the form of jihad is actually the Almighty's punishment, which He is inflicting upon the people who rejected His messenger and His message, like He punished the nations that rejected the message of the messengers in history in the earlier times. Likewise, He is doing now in the case of these people. It has got nothing to do with people of the later times, non-Muslims of the later times. I now move on to the second segment of my presentation, which has to do with the understanding of Islam. And in this understanding of Islam, we have now reached the discussion on faith, on beliefs. I mentioned it in my earlier presentations that the Almighty presents the case of beliefs through arguments, evidences, signs, so that people understand that these claims that are being made of beliefs are real. Belief actually means to acknowledge a reality which is there, which is real, but it cannot be seen. On what basis? On the basis of arguments, on the basis of evidences that are presented to understand and to acknowledge those beliefs. And a person is responsible to the Almighty to accept those beliefs if those arguments are presented to the person, and the person then is left with no choice but to accept those beliefs. So we will start the discussion on belief in God from today onwards. Belief in God, according to the Quran, is based on a number of reasons. You see, if we look at the fact that we humans, we acknowledge realities for a number of reasons. We acknowledge realities sometimes because we can perceive them through our five senses. We can either see them or hear them or taste them or smell them or touch them. So these are the five senses which, when we employ and perceive a reality, we acknowledge it. There is another faculty of the humans which enables them to realize that there are certain other realities which, even though they cannot see, yet they're there. And that faculty is called the faculty of intuition. We know certain realities because we know them by birth. We know them intuitively. Moral principles that the entire humanity shares are the realities that we know from inside by birth intuitively. We have aesthetic sense. We see a beautiful scenery and we admire it as beautiful. Why? Have we been trained to do it, to appreciate? No. There is something within us that is a part of our intuitive understanding, realization, that causes us to believe that what we are seeing is really beautiful. And there are some scenes which are ugly. So, what I'm saying is that there are certain realities that we know intuitively. Likewise, we have the faculty of intellect. Uh, we have data with us through our sense perception. We have data with us through our intuitive understanding. Intellect analyzes that data, puts them in grades in different categories, and reaches results through analysis, draws conclusions. That's what the intellect does. The Quran has employed each and every faculty of humans which causes them to believe in realities, for them to appreciate, realize, and acknowledge that there is a God. I will be able to talk only briefly today about uh, one faculty, which is sense perception. Uh, we see, we hear, we touch, we smell, we taste, and we say that what we are perceiving through one sense perception or another is a reality. But this acknowledgement of reality through sense perception sometimes takes the form of the understanding and appreciation not of ours but of somebody else, of others. I did not see Barber, Churchill, Alexander, etc. But there are many others who saw them, and they reported in a manner which was kind of unanimous. Such a large number of people have reported that they saw people who were famous, Aristotle, Alexander, uh, Babur in India, etc., so many others, uh, that it cannot be denied. So, one way humans acknowledge realities is through the information they get from others, they get from history, which actually is an information based on sense perception. God Almighty mentions to us there are great grand ancestors, Adam and Eve, Adam and Hawa alayhimus salam. They had a first-hand experience of God. The Quran alludes to this description, this fact, in at least 7 different passages. One of them is the one that we find in Surah Al-Baqarah, second surah, from verses 34 to 39. And what you learn is that Adam and Eve went to a garden. They were asked to stay there, live there, do whatever they wanted to, except for the fact that they could not come close to a certain tree, which what they were not able to follow, and therefore they were eventually asked to leave the garden. And there was this Satan who enticed them to eat from the tree that was prohibited. Now, this story, obviously, when Adam and Eve settled in this world and they had children, what is it that they must have been talking about, if not this story? of their direct uh, experience of God. Did they see Him? I don't think so. Did they hear Him? It's very likely. They had a first hand experience of God which involved their sense perception. How is it possible that they would not have shared this story over and over again with their children, their progeny? How is it possible that their children won't have shared this story with their children, the grandchildren, the great grandchildren of Adam and Eve? So when humanity proliferated and dispersed to different parts of the world, they took along with them the understanding and idea of God, because God was perceived through uh, these senses that we humans have by our great ancestors. So we'll keep talking about belief in God in the next few sessions on the basis of intuition and intellect as well. Now let me move on to the third part of my presentation. It's always based on some contemporary issue, and right now there's nothing more significant in the contemporary world, in the current affairs, than the great tragedy that took place in New Zealand uh, on the 15th of March, Friday, the 15th of March, uh, when a Christian terrorist uh, attacked terrorists, two mosques, and there were 49 Muslims who had gone for saying the Jummah prayers, who were killed, who were martyred. Uh, the attention focus of the entire world uh, was and still is on those two tiny islands, basically, which comprise of New Zealand. Uh, and what we saw was a remarkable attitude, behavior of New Zealanders in general and their Prime Minister in particular to help the bereaved Muslim families uh, to experience that there were people who were there to share their grief. And we could not have expected a stronger voice of protest, condemnation, than what was spoken by the Prime Minister of New Zealand, not just on one occasion, but on many occasions. The response is unprecedented. Um, I'm sure far more than what we expected. Now is the occasion that I think we as Muslims should take this opportunity to clarify a few points. I will just mention two of them. One thing, and that obviously is going to only happen if we are prepared to do soul searching. Incidents like these shake you up, force you to think, revisit, and look for the reasons that lead people to go as mad as that man went, and to see if there could be anything done to correct the wrongs that have happened. I think one of the things that this occasion should be employed, the opportunity should be utilized to put across, is that from our side, the side of the Muslims, we must clarify to our non-Muslim brothers and sisters that the expression kafir used in the Quran, which is used to apply to people who are worse than beasts, as for instance in verse 6 of Surah number 98, Surah Al-Bayyinah. I think it is our moral and religious obligation to tell these people that it doesn't apply to them. It applies, it applied to a group of people who, when they were presented with the truth coming from God, through the messenger of God directly, in a way that it became absolutely unmistakably clear that it was God's message, they still continued to deny and reject it. They were the ones about whom God, who knows everything, declared that they know and yet they are rejecting. They are fully aware of the fact that this message is from God and yet they are opposing it. We must clarify this understanding to the non-Muslims and should tell them that if the Quran is using very strong words against these people, you are not from amongst them. We have no business, no justification to claim that it applies to you. How can the expression kafir be applied to such good people as the Prime Minister of New Zealand? How? Obviously, there is something grossly wrong in this understanding that all non-Muslims are kafir. Obviously, kafirs are destined to the hellfire and to stay there forever. But it doesn't apply to every non-Muslim. And we must also clarify that this expression is going to be employed by the Almighty Himself and nobody else. And it can be relevant to both Muslims and to non-Muslims, as the Quran clarifies itself. A second, a second understanding that must be clarified to the non-Muslims is, and obviously, it will be an effort that would help many Muslims also to come out of that darkness of misunderstanding. That, as we studied in the first segment, that the expectation of the Almighty mentioned in the Quran to fight the non-Muslims and kill them was actually meant for the people who were there at the time of the Prophet, rejected him despite knowing fully that it was from God. They were punished by the Almighty, like He has always been punishing the nations that received God's message through His messengers and yet rejecting those messages. We must tell the non-Muslims that this directive of the Almighty is not meant for anybody else, because we do not know who knows that God's message has reached him, her, and yet is rejecting it um, unjustifiably, because the person is arrogant, because the person is rigid, etc. We don't know. We don't know anything about non-Muslims, what they're going through from inside, nor about Muslims. So it was an era-specific requirement, which was not meant to be generalized. I think this is an important clarification that we owe to the non-Muslims, and we should make avail this opportunity to let the good message of Islam across to people, not aggressively, politely. There are people who obviously would want to know what this message is, and we should tell them that the Almighty's message is most peaceful, most peace-loving. The Quran tells us that killing one person is as huge a crime as if killing the entire mankind. There are no contradictions in the Quran. How can the Quran mention in one place that you cannot kill a human, and on the other hand asks believers to fight them and kill them? We must clarify that this is something which is not a part of our faith. Right, Brother Muratib, I promise that I'll finish within half an hour, and then the rest of the time will be for the question answers. So I'm done with my job.
Uh, Thank you very much, Jazakallah. You are already always on spot and on time, mashallah. uh, yeah, let's start the question answer. We will take one by one. Some brother asked me that can we ask question in Urdu language? So yes, you can ask. Our speaker is very well versed in both English and Urdu language, so he can reply you. So let's take the first question from Sister Rafia.
Planning, Dr. Khalid, can you hear me?
I can.
Um, Dr. Khalid, I wanted to ask you that, I find that some of the young people who are very frustrated with the injustice, the poverty, the pain they see, do ask that during the Prophet's time, Allah inflicted his punishment. So now they say, where is the just Allah who allows so much injustice to go around? And they have their beliefs in God, but they are quite confused about what is happening in the world. Second is, when you mentioned the darkness of misunderstanding, the thing that has really troubled me, of course, New Zealand is one example, but on the other hand, we have a young student who goes and kills his teacher, a college student, because the teacher was having an event to welcome new boys and girls. Now, what sort of Islam was this boy? What has he been taught? And what is his understanding of Islam? So could you please answer these two questions?
As far as the first question is concerned, let's be clear that the way the Almighty has designed this worldly life, He has by design made it a mystery. He has allowed questions, troubling questions to be there in life. Why? Because He wants people to think. He wants people to be concerned. He wants people to be confused. And as a result, He wants them to probe, to investigate, and then consider the Almighty's grand plan, the bigger plan, and then realize that, oh goodness me, now I understand that it's not just this life, there is another life. If actually, can some, there is somebody who needs to mute the mic. I'm getting distracted. Uh, the grand plan of the Almighty, which comprises of this worldly life as a trial, and the next life as the uh, the life of punishment and the life of reward. We can only understand it if we go through the difficulties, problems, complexities of this life and ask questions sincerely, desperately. So I think if there are some youngsters who are asking this question, it's it's the right time to tell them, look here, understand God's plan without understanding His scheme of the life hereafter is impossible. And if for a short while we assume that that answer is not correct, give us any other answer, give us any other solution. There is no solution, no answer that can satisfy humans except the one that has been given by the Almighty, which is that God has designed this life that we have been given by Him through His mercy to be divided into two components, two parts: worldly life of trial and the next worldly life of reward and punishment, the result of the trial. You cannot understand God, you cannot understand God's message if you do not understand the life hereafter and the emphasis that the Almighty uh, lays on understanding it properly and appreciating it. As far as the second question is concerned, um, you see, the way religion is taught in some parts of the world, there are two problems which, if they are not addressed properly, sadly, the incident of Bahawalpur is going to continue to get repeated over and over again. One problem with the manner our religion and religious messages taught is that people are made to believe that everything that is mentioned in the Quran and everything that is mentioned in Hadith is meant to be applied for all times. I there's somebody who has the mic unmuted. Please mute it. The the result of it is that people read. You know, when you start reading the Quran and Hadith with a mindset that here is a message for us which has to apply to everyone for all times to come, then most certainly they are going to uh, read verses which are actually telling us to hate, to kill, and people are therefore going to hate and kill for the sake of God. Now, when we clarify that these verses that have got to do with hatred are era specific and there were reasons why they were revealed, then people would know that the Almighty doesn't want us to hate others and doesn't want us to kill others. That's one part of the problem. That is, uh, the content of religion, the way it is given, uh, is problematic. The other part of the problem is that the manner religion or religious message is delivered, uh, there is no room for questioning. It's indoctrination, brainwashing, the same message delivered over and over again by people who are impressive, who are apparently very religious. The environment is such that when you go there, you feel as if the only truth that is coming to you is from the person that you're listening to. You're not supposed to listen to anybody else. You're not supposed to use your own intellect. You're not allowed to ask questions because you'll get confused. And faith is the most important thing. And the faith that you've gotten is the only right faith. And the manner you need to get faith and strengthen is to listen to the same stuff over and over again and to act upon it. So, you know, the entire environment is conducive for making a person an extremist, and that's what these people do. So, for instance, this young chap, he must have heard this hadith over and over again that if you see an evil happening, the best thing is to use your hand. If that's not possible, then use your tongue. And that too is not possible, then you condemn it in your heart. So this young chap, he used his hands to get rid of an evil that he thought an evil. But obviously, this is a very misleading interpretation of the hadith. Little did this young man realize that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, did not use his hand for 13 years, despite being God's messenger in Mecca. Although there were so many statues, idols that were being worshipped over there, it was only after he became the ruler that he got the authority of implementing God's will on the people.
Uh, Next question, we have our new friend, Hilary Saunders. Hilary Saunders will ask the question. Please unmute your mic and you can ask a question, please. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
My question is maybe somewhat confused and maybe in three parts. When the Quran told the Sahaba at the time of the Prophet to kill and beleaguer the Kafirs, how did they know who was a Kafir? But also, if that was Allah's punishment and those people were destroyed, does it mean there are no longer any Kafirs around? But then I also wonder, you talk about us understanding intuitively certain things and understanding and believing others through our senses and through other people's senses. So Adam and Hua, may Allah be pleased with them, had direct connection with God and spread it to their children. In the same way, the Sahaba had the direct connection with the Prophet, peace be upon him, and would have passed that on to the future generations. So if you are trying to share the message of Islam to a disbeliever today, should they or would they have some innate understanding of Allah from Adam and Hua, and also from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Sorry, I hope I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, got it. You promised three questions. I'm going to make three questions out of this. The first one that you mentioned, you see, the Quran delves into this whole affair in detail. What you find is that this theme that non-believers are to be inflicted with the Almighty's punishment when they are going to receive God's message through His Rasul is, I dare say, a theme which has been mentioned in the Quran more than any other theme. The stories of the earlier messengers have been reported over again. An individual might justifiably ask, why has a story like that of Nuh alayhi salam been repeated so many times? Was it not enough to mention the story only once? The answer is that the reason why the story was mentioned was that, like in the case of Nuh alayhi salam, the nation that was rejecting the message of the last messenger, may God have mercy on him, was also on the verge of being destroyed. And therefore, in order for them to be reminded, urged over and over again, they need to be informed about the fate of those people again and again. The stories have many things in common. One of them is that this punishment would become justifiable only when the messenger leaves the place where the non-believers, kuffar, were residing. So it's only after migration that the punishment gets inflicted. And what you see is exactly the same mentioned in the Quran in Surah Bani Israel or Isra, the 17th chapter of the Quran, where when the Quran talks about the possibility of the Prophet migrating, immediately afterwards says that thereafter they're not going to be spared. They're not going to survive you except for only a short while. Why? Because that's Sunnatullah, God's way. That's how He deals with people who reject His messengers. The Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, migrated to Medina along with his companions, and then started the struggle, Battle of Badr, and thereafter you find that the Quran mentioned in Surah An-Nisa in particular that the companions are going to different tribes. There are people within those tribes who are Muslims. There are people who are kuffar. And the Almighty is directing them. That that's what the strategy, the policy that needs to be adopted. And then there came this deadline, which was in the 9th century Hijrah, which, when it was crossed, the Almighty declared that after the lapse of these sacred months, these polytheists are to be killed. There was a distinct policy mentioned regarding the people of the book. They were not to be killed, they were to be fought against until such time that they would subjugate, surrender, and give jizya, realizing, acknowledging that they were smaller citizens, lesser citizens. That was again a punishment. And a third punishment was inflicted on the hypocrites. Now, all this was done um, under the supervision of the Messenger of God, who in turn was guided by the Almighty through the Quran. And therefore, all the details were sorted out, uh, you know, in a manner where not anything or very few things happened which went against the Almighty's will. Although we have a few reports that there were some people who did things which were beyond the permission allowed by the Almighty, and therefore they were reprimanded. So what I'm trying to say is, in answer to your question, that how did they do it, and how do we know that they are no longer kuffar? Well, the answer to this question is, sister, that in order for somebody to be declared a kafir, I have to know that the person knows fully well that the message that I'm delivering to him is from God, and that despite knowing it most clearly, he is arrogantly rejecting it. There is no way of knowing it after God has decided that no more wahi is going to be revealed. So now we are confined to the directives which requires us to respect the sanctity of life. We will deliver the message. We will invite them to the message. They will ask questions. They will ask very ugly, discomforting questions. We will always answer them, hopefully with a smile, politely, the way the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, did consistently until such time that he was asked that now you be firm against them, because God knows that they are no more likely to believe. So it's the Quran which tells us, one of the verses I recited in the first segment, which says, "Yu'azzibhumullahu biaydikum." God is going to punish them, O companions of my Prophet, through your hands. In a earlier chapter, Surah Anfal, when the Almighty was commenting on the events of Battle of Badr, He said, "Look here, falam taqtuluhum." You did not kill them. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ قَتَلَهُمْ. Instead, it was God, Allah, who killed them. And then mentioned, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ. Oh Prophet, you did not throw pebbles at them when you threw them. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. It was God who did it. So it turned into a storm. Into a storm. So when you read the Quranic text with an understanding that it's from God and it is consistent, it doesn't go against its own clearly stated principles. You come to this conclusion and understanding that we have been mentioning. You see, when we say, coming to your other question, when we say that Adam and Eve, they had a first-hand experience, and it was sent down to the next generations. It's just to explain a reality. And the reality is, how is it that right from the beginning of human journey, you have God, Allah, and other names, Khuda, etc., as household expression. There are many theories presented by philosophers, by anthropologists, etc. The Quran explains it clearly that the reason is that the first couple uh, that came to this world came with a clear experience of God. And that experience then resulted in people learning about it through word of mouth, through a very credible source that their father, their grandfather, their great grandfather were the ones who saw and who experienced this remarkable episode of coming or being very close to God. Uh, when we know something intuitively and we let others know about it, um, we just remind them. We just help them understand. We can't force them. Actually, what happens is that they all work together. When I'll proceed in explaining the other aspects of belief in God, I'll mention why God is to be appreciated or is appreciated intuitively. I'll explain why he needs to be understood and appreciated intellectually. So all these different forms of arguments, they come together to help an individual understand that God is the biggest reality of this world. So I'm just building upon it, and hopefully, if you're going to be there the next time as well, you'll see that
Inshallah.
it's gradually, inshallah.
Jazakallahu khairan.
Yeah. Wa jazak.
Uh, our next question is from Brother Nushad Shafkat. Brother Nushad Shafkat, you can unmute your mic, please, and ask the question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. My question
Right.
relates to the third part of your talk with regard to the description or the understanding of kafir that we have. Dr. Saab, I would like to ask you of the methods that we should go about in spreading this, because as far as the subcontinent is concerned, I think it is so ingrained now that any person who does not call himself a Muslim is a kafir. While the actual understanding, as you have pointed out, is that only those who have received the message, knew that it was the message from God, and then refused to understand, to accept it as a message from God, only those people are kafirs. What must we as individuals, as me, for example, what should I do in order to spread this message? Because it is so deeply ingrained in almost everybody, even those who are educated, even those who just go to the mosque once in a week and say their Friday prayers. And the other thing is, your experience, does it show that this concept is prevalent in other parts of the world too? Or is it only in the subcontinent that this happens? Thank you very much, Doctor. And a brilliant talk, Doctor.
Thank you. Uh, Coming to the second question, I think it's worldwide. It's spread all across. Uh, I don't know whether you've gone through that clip where a young man is talking to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and one of the things that he mentioned was that I would like you to become a Muslim. And obviously, the spirit was, the passion was that uh, while you are what you are, there is no chance for you to succeed. So what a good person you are. I would like you to become a Muslim and therefore be eligible to enter the paradise. Brother, you know what? There is no chance of any improvement or reform amongst Muslims unless we convince them that, for God's sake, read the Quran, read it with understanding, read it critically, critically examine your religious views in the light of the Quran. No other way methodology is going to enable people to change their views. And this task is not an easy task. Why? Because it so happens that people read the Quran with their eyes colored. The glasses of their, the color of the glasses is biased. It's they read from within the text what they want to understand from it. But it's not a hopeless situation, I tell you. The Quran is remarkably clear. The Quran is remarkably effective. All that we need to do is to continue to make an effort to help people read the Quran with an open mind. And, once a person is prepared to do it, we can then tell him that, look here, the Quran has no contradiction. I keep telling people that the first and foremost principle of Quranic interpretation is that the Quran, the word of God, is free from contradictions. That's what the Quran says as a proof of the fact that it's from God. So, how is it possible, for instance, that on the one hand we have verse 98 colon 6, sixth verse of Surah 98 Al-Bayyinah, which I mentioned, says that these kuffar are worse than beasts. And on the other hand, the Almighty is telling us in Surah Al Imran, Surah 3, verse 113 to 115, telling us that all these non believers are not alike. Some of them are brilliant humans. No matter what they do, their good deeds are not, whatever good deeds they do, their deeds are not going to go waste. So I think they need to be helped to realize and understand that they need to read the Quran with an open mind. And I think there is this false confidence that, somehow causes the right understanding to get into them. So that wall has to be somehow broken, has to be shattered. And I can't do it. You can't do it, honestly. It's only God and His book that can do it. And for that, brother, I tell you, we need to be very polite, very humble. Because when we get, and I do realize that I do it myself as well, I'm guilty of it. When we get emotional, then, very quickly, the ego of the other person gets erected, and there's no further communication possible. So, all that we need to do, to both Muslims and non Muslims, is to make an earnest attempt to help them understand God's message. Like the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, did in Mecca. He asked them over and over again, listen to the Almighty's message. Once they are able to open up to the message of God, it's going to just penetrate and will inshallah make the change that we are all worried that should be brought about within the souls of all humans, including Muslims.
We have a next question from Brother Jamal Mustafa. Brother Jamal Mustafa, you can unmute your mic and ask the question. Unmute your mic, please. Yeah,
I'm
thank
sorry,
you.
I think that was by mistake. I didn't raise my hand. I don't have any particular question. Thank you.
Oh, I
Nice
see.
listening.
We have a next question from Sister Huma Beg. Sister, you can unmute your mic and ask the question.
Assalamu alaikum ji. Dr. Saab, I wanted to ask you a few tiny questions. I heard your explanation. I agree with it, but I'm thinking now that A, there is no force in Islam. So why punish those who choose not to believe? Because Islam teaches us that we are not the judges. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the biggest judge. So if Muslims were asked to do God's deed at that time, what happened to free will then? That means those people should have had the right to deny Islam if they wanted. So that's one question that I think it goes against the free will notion and the fact that there is no force in Islam. Number two is that in this particular case where there was a specific war, there was a certain behavior. So I can understand why they were asked to be killed, to lose their right to life. But a part of me also thinks that punishing somebody on earth is better than punishing them later on. So I'm a little conflicted there. The last thing was that you spoke about, the lady in the beginning talked about how the young people are taught today. My question is that what are we waiting for? All of us know that the way children, they're not being taught Islam to start with. The ones who are teaching Islam are not teaching them the right way. So, who is going to put pressure on the powers to change these rules? What are we waiting for? Why are we waiting for leadership? And does it not put more pressure on scholars who have the right skills to pursue this with a bit more vigilance, because Islam does not separate the religious from the political? So why can't we humbly, softly, and yet with strong pressure change the way children are being misled into believing that all this negativity is Islam? Thank you.
Uh, your first question is interesting and I'm sure a little difficult to answer. Uh, I think that's the difficulty that we are confronting in explaining it to both Muslims and non-Muslims. But let me make an attempt. You talked about free will and the freedom to practice religion. It's there. But don't forget that in this free world, no matter how free it is, there are people who die, right? And why do they die? Allow me to say, because God kills them. No matter whether it's heart attack or cancer or an accident, God kills them. Wallahu yuhyi wa yumeet. So there are acts of God which only He can do, and humans have no business to do them. And one of the most significant of them is that He kills. I mean, let's face it, He kills every day, and there is nothing wrong with it. You see, the entire humanity gives God this prerogative that He can kill when He kills. Now, what makes it difficult for you to appreciate is that when the Sahaba, the companions, they killed the polytheists. Why did they kill them? Well, because God asked them to. And God is there Himself directly revealing His message, His divine revelation. He's in direct contact. So, just to help you understand, had God asked me to kill somebody, I would have done it, but He would not. I have no way of knowing that God is talking to me directly. So now it's not possible. When the divine revelation was getting revealed, it was possible. Why did God kill people even when they were denying His message? Was it not denying them their free will? My understanding to this particular part of the problem that is going through your mind is that when God says that you are free to choose whatever faith you want to choose, or you want to choose no faith, is because uh, in most cases, the world that we are living in, the reality is less than 100% certain. And therefore, God allows people to do whatever they want to. Because even if somebody is doing things wrong, is not not believing in the right message, he has a justification. But once that possibility is eliminated completely, as indeed is the case with the people who received the message of God directly from his messengers, we are given to understand that they have no reason or excuse whatsoever except for their base desires or their ego for them to say no, which is why in such cases the Almighty uh, takes away their right to choose freely. So put these two points together and maybe there is an answer to it. One, God chooses to kill people. There's nothing wrong with it. Two, he chose to kill a group of people at different points in history because they had deprived themselves of the right to choose freely by not choosing what was absolutely clear. So, in other words, when the Almighty says people can choose freely whatever faith they want to, there is an implied understanding in the brackets, parenthesis, which is that you can choose freely so long as there is some reason for you to accept and behave differently. You said that you're not sure whether punishing here or punishing there is better. Punishing here probably is better. I agree with you absolutely. And the punishments in this world are no comparison to the punishment which some people are going to meet with, and may the Almighty enable all of us to be saved from them. Those punishments are going to be for a long period of time. So some of the punishments that the Almighty inflicts here are with the hope, the possibility that people may change now. So you're right. I mean, punishment here is not a big deal compared to punishments there. What are we waiting for? Honestly, we're not waiting for anything. We are trying as best as we can, not as much as we should. Our efforts are not enough, but we are prepared to do more, provided there are opportunities. We go to places, we talk to places, to people, we teach, we write, and then obviously we have certain obligations of our family, etc. So we try to balance things out, but we continue to wait for opportunities, and if there is an opportunity out there, we do not shy away from it. But I can see the sense of urgency in your message, in the question that you put across. I'm told that you're coming back to Pakistan, and maybe that might do the trick. So let's all do whatever we can do in our own respective capacities.
Thank you.
Jazakallah for our speaker and for all participants. I think we have taken quite a lot of questions in half an hour, and we will continue this format for next session as well, which is expected on 7th of April, 9 o'clock local UK time. So we will dedicate half an hour uh, time for the question answer, and you can get prepared. You can have a notebook with you. The best thing, a printed or physical diary with you. You can note down and track the whole session progress in terms of question answer. We very thankful to our speaker, Dr. Khalid Zaheer, and inshallah we will again meet in the same class on 7th of April, Sunday, 9 o'clock local UK time. Jazakallah khair, everybody. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.